Welcome to English language, vocabulary, grammar. Now we have a pair of words, awful and awesome. Today they are opposites. Today they are complete antonyms. But once upon a time they were synonyms. In Old English, awful and awesome had exactly the same meaning. They were synonyms. They had the same root, awe, and similar meanings, but now they have become opposites. So, how a pair of synonyms come to become antonyms? How the words which had the same meaning drift and completely occupy opposite poles having opposite meanings. So, history of semantic drift through the centuries and what it implies. And awful and awesome are just an example. We have more examples where similar words or synonyms having the same root later diverge and become antonyms. So let us trace the history of awful and awesome, how this pair of synonyms became antonyms. Originally, both awesome and awful meant almost the same thing, full of awe, inspiring fear, reverence, or dread. Both awful and awesome had the same meaning, full of awe, inspiring fear, reverence, or dread. Fear. Awful is the older word, and awesome actually appeared later. So, awful is the older word, but both of these were derived from awe and meant full of awe or inspiring awe. Awe root plus full suffix, awe root plus some suffix, awful, awesome. And the word awe meant respect and fear. It is interesting to trace how they move to diametrically opposite poles in meaning. And today, awful means very bad, horrible, and awesome means very good, superb, complete opposites. Yet at one time, both of them meant inspiring awe, that is, full of awe. That is, awe means inspiring fear, reverence, or dread. Both of them had the same meaning, but today they are complete opposites. One meaning very bad, the other meaning very good. Let us trace the history. And the noun awe in English goes back to Middle English and Germanic roots, meaning fear, terror, or dread, often mixed with reverence, especially towards divine power. That is awe. The word awe, from which both awesome and awful, both the words are derived, the noun awe meant, and it goes back to Middle English and has Germanic roots. The word awe meant fear, terror, or dread, combined with reverence towards divine powers. For example, thunder and lightning evoked awe in primitive people. They feared as well as respected. So they worshipped in order to appease these powers. So when they could not understand the meaning of thunder and lightning, which they feared and respected, they feared and worshipped. That is exactly what awe meant in older English. Awe meant fear along with reverence, especially towards divine or supernatural powers. Now, awful is the older formation. From awe, awful is the older word. Awesome appeared only in the late 16th century. For several centuries, the word awful was used in a positive sense or context. It meant awe inspiring, worthy of profound respect, especially in religious or lofty contexts. For example, the awful majesty of God. They used the expression, the awful majesty of God. So the word awful was positive. It meant respect. It meant reverence. The awful majesty of God. So awful, the older word, actually had a positive connotation. And awesome appeared later, that is as late as 16th century, the end of 16th century. But awful being the older word, it was positive in use. It had a positive sense. It meant respect and reverence. So, an example of this is the awful majesty of God. So, awful was positive. At that time, of course, awesome was not there. Awesome came later, that is in the late 16th century, but both of them were positive, the awful majesty of God. Awesome appeared in late 16th century with a meaning profoundly reverential, inspiring awe or dread, essentially overlapping with the older awful. So when awesome appeared, it had more or less the same meaning. Both awesome and awful had the same meaning, reverence and dread. Thus, the terms awful and awesome were near synonyms. Only the nuance differed slightly and the relative proportion of respect and dread, but they implied reference or respect with fear. Both of them implied reverence or respect with fear. Only in the proportion of reverence and fear they differed. That was a very fine distinction, but both of them were almost synonyms. Awesome and awful both meant the same thing, respect with dread, including reverence with fear. And the difference was very slight, only the nuance, but otherwise both awesome and awful were identical in meaning or near identical in meaning. Only the difference was in the relative proportion of respect and dread. So awesome, when it appeared later, it had almost the same meaning as awful. In 19th century and early 20th century, awesome began to weaken and broaden. And by the mid 1900s, especially in American English, it shifted towards remarkable, impressive. Now, awesome began to be used as remarkable and impressive. That means no more reverence, no reverence, no respect to divinity, nothing related to supernatural powers, nothing related to divine powers, nothing related to gods. So it was just anything remarkable. And then awesome, mainly a slang, it began to be used for extremely good. Now see that there is no reverence, there is no divine implication, there's no fear, the dread is gone. Just it means very good, which is now its primary everyday sense. So the reverence, that part began to weaken and the meaning broadened, the usage broadened, and awesome means very good, impressive, remarkable, without any necessary reverence or fear. That reverence and fear was gone. The sense of good, superb was retained. The element of fear and dread was gone. So that is how awesome changed from respect and fear towards divine and supernatural powers to simply good and superb, wonderful, excellent, and the fear or the dread was gone. The reverence was gone, only it meant appreciation. So appreciation was the meaning, not reverence. Now the interesting question, why they became opposites? When several near synonyms coexist, awful, awesome, or terrible and terrific, right? Terrible means very bad and terrific means very good. They tend to specialize when there are near synonyms, particularly derived from the same root, then they tend to specialize. Some drift toward more negative and others toward more positive, often through repeated colloquial use. Awful specialized towards negative, frightful, very bad, while awesome was available to take over the positive side of overwhelming, impressive, and 20th century slang then pushed it firmly into the great, excellent slot. awesome, the word was pushed into the great and excellent, that meaning, and awful was pushed to the negative side, horrible, very bad. So awful was pushed to the negative side and awesome was pushed to the positive side. That is how they become opposites, but that is not the a story with awful and awesome only. There are other pairs of words, notably terrible and terrific, both derived from terror. Again, one is positive, one is negative. So, this kind of near synonyms moving to opposite poles is not unknown in English. It's quite common. When there are several near synonyms, they tend to specialize. One of the pair moves to positive side and the other moves to the negative side. So this pattern is common in English. We give another example. The same kind of semantic split appears in pairs like terrible and terrific. Both of them had the same meaning. Both were synonyms. But terrific is now used in positive sense and terrible in negative sense. These shifts illustrate how connotation, not core etymology, drives modern opposites. Awesome and awful still conceptually relate to overwhelming awe, but one is now used with a positive tone and the other with a negative one. Similarly, terrific and terrible, both having the same root, both were once almost synonyms, but now terrific has moved to a positive tone and terrible towards a negative one. So this is quite common in English. So that was a story of awesome and awful and also terrific and terrible, how near synonyms become opposites. What were synonyms once? Now they have become antonyms, and this trend, this shift is quite common in English language. Near synonyms derived from same root tend to specialize and eventually one is used in the positive sense and one in the negative sense, just as awesome and awful or terrific and terrible. That was the interesting story of awesome and awful, how synonyms became antonyms. We shall meet again with more such interesting concepts, more such interesting videos. Till then, thank you and goodbye.